like the eternal city that is Rome, where the ecclesiastical splendor of the Renaissance completely enthralls the imagination. The dome of St. Peter's rises upwards like a heavenly choir. From the topmost pinnacle, the centuries that are Rome spread out in everlasting significance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast this Thursday afternoon. Today we have on Jason Evert, the author of Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. So you said this book is a bestseller right now on Amazon.
Yeah. Just someone emailed me last week and they're like, hey, took a look, apparently went up to #1 in the gender and sexuality category in religious studies. So happy to see that one.
Yeah. So your interview on Matt Fradd also went to the top of trending in the Catholic world, at least.
Yeah, that really definitely helped get the word out. I mean, obviously it's a subject that every single day is in the news, and Catholics as well as non-Catholics are trying to wrap their head around it. And like, hey, how do we respond to this with charity and clarity? And so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's a very important topic right now. So a boring question, what inspired you to write this book, and when did you start writing it?
Years ago, traveling around all the high schools that I do, giving chastity talks, I'd meet a lot of young people wrestling with this topic and their family members of like, what do I do? My daughter says she's non-binary, or, my kid wants to get surgery, and what do I do? He's turning 18 next year. How do I dissuade him? And you hear all these struggles and parents at a loss for what to do. Priests, catechists, teachers of just like, hey, I was just at a school, is it yesterday or 2 days ago? And the teacher's like, hey, I've got a girl in my third period class, and she wants me to use the preferred pronoun as they for her because she identifies as non-binary. Like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. And so I was just seeing such a need for some direction on how to understand this important topic, and then how to provide kind of pastoral guidance for the young people that might be wrestling with gender dysphoria or exploring these new kind of gender identities.
Mm-hmm. So was this a problem when you were in high school growing up, like all this dysphoria? I think,
no.
Even I'm too old for it, and I'm 21. It wasn't around when I was growing up in middle school.
No, it wasn't really on the radar before Instagram came around. I mean, before social media, yes, gender dysphoria did exist, but you look at the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. That came out, I think the most recent edition was 2013, and the rates of prevalence for gender dysphoria was like, for men, it was like 1 out of every 0.005%. It was so low, but then now with social media and the social contagion piece of this, we've seen a rapid ascent, predominantly among adolescent females experiencing something called rapid onset gender dysphoria, where they didn't have gender dysphoria as little kids, but then all of a sudden in middle adolescence, it's like, I'm trans, my friend's non-binary. It's like, where the heck is this coming from? So there is definitely a social contagion element to it that definitely was not around when you and I were back in high school.
So why are all these young children so vulnerable to all of the social media stuff? Why is it influencing them so powerfully?
Yeah, well, I heard a really interesting insight this morning. Abigail Schreier wrote a book called Irreversible Damage, which is really good in covering this subject. And she said elsewhere, not in that book, that someone was asking, what about this religious component to transgenderism? And she said, well, for the secular person, these new genders are like a soul. And so for those who don't have like a religious background, an idea of spirituality and eternity, we're looking for something beyond just the material. And these idea of this new gender, this something that is more profound to the reality of me than even my body, is something that they're grasping to. Because you look at what Vatican II said, that when God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. And so what that means is if we lose sight of supernatural realities, then even natural realities like male and female are obscured from our vision. And so kind of, to me, that's where we're at today. And so there's as I'd mentioned earlier, the social contagion piece. It's typically impacting adolescent females who come from more progressive families, typically to go to public schools. Oftentimes they're already struggling with anxiety, depression, trauma, broken families, often high-functioning autism. And then they're in a social circle where like one girl comes out as trans. And then before you know it, it's 5, 6, 7, 8 of them on the same campus. And so there used to be room in the world for tomboys, but now if you are kind of more masculinized in your interests or hobbies or attire, then it's like, oh, well, you're trans. Like that's kind of the very myopic view to diagnose anyone who is not gender conforming. And so to me, there is a big social contagion piece to it that's especially impacting the young females.
Yeah. So are these like the unpopular kids in high school that are trying to make themselves popular by appearing different?
Typically not to judge the kids, but yeah, they typically do not have a boyfriend. They don't usually have a lot of extracurricular activities going on in their life. They're spending a massive amount of time on Instagram, Tumblr, Reddit, YouTube, watching these trans influencers and things like this. They're not really living out in the 3-dimensional world, interacting with a boyfriend or playing sports or interacting with nature. I remember one girl saying the time that she felt most dysphoric was when she was in her room alone with a screen. And so especially in the wake of COVID, with so many kids being isolated from each other, a lot of them started going down these rabbit holes of these influencers they're finding online and finding commonalities between the struggles that they were experiencing and these trans influencer stories of just like, yeah, I never felt like I quite fit in with the other girls. Like they were into this and this and this, but I was not into that. I was into this and this and this. And I found out the reason why is because I'm not a girl. I'm non-binary, or I'm a boy, or I'm this, or I'm that. And so for a lot of these people searching for a sense of identity, these trans identities seem to offer that for them. And so they're kind of grabbing on to that. And then unfortunately, obviously the culture is saying, well, then this is who you are and you need puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries. Then you'll be at your home in your own body. And then unfortunately they try those things and it doesn't take away the problems. It just creates new ones.
Mm-hmm. So myself being the owner of like a 450 member Discord server, like a few of these people, they'll come in the server, like they have their pronouns in their bio, like their profile pic. You can obviously tell they're influenced by this stuff. Yeah. So usually like they'll reach out to me, seeing me being at the top of the server, the owner of the server. So like these 13-year-old girls that want to become boys.
Yeah.
And I think there's been 2 girls, and both of them told me that if they just take these hormone blockers, they'll finally feel their true self. So I guess my intention was always to tell them not to take the hormonal stuff, not to mess that up, because they'll regret that later in life, most likely.
Yeah.
But is that a good stance to take? Is that the first thing I should do? Or
yeah, what I try to tell them is that like you were not born into the wrong body. You were kind of born into the wrong culture, a culture that's telling you might have to hurt your body in order to be your authentic self. And that womanhood shouldn't be this little narrow box that you have to fit into. You have to be into all these stereotypical feminine things. And if you're not, then you're not a woman. No, we need to kind of expand, in a sense, our understanding of womanhood, that a woman is not a person with a female personality in any body. It's a person with a female body and any personality. And so there's lots of different ways to be a woman. And so, yeah, I mean, if they go on the puberty blockers, the cross-sex hormones, I mean, if you go from one to the other, you're sterilized for the rest of your life. You put the girl on testosterone, in 5 years, she's going to need to get a hysterectomy because of how the uterus will atrophy, an increased risk of endometrial cancer. Her risk of heart disease will quadruple. You put her on the puberty blockers. It doesn't just like pause puberty. It pauses neurological development, bone development. We've got 15-year-old kids now with osteoporosis. Like, this is not the answer. And that's why the folks who kind of started all this stuff over in the Netherlands, what's called the Dutch protocol, they're backing off on this. I mean, it's a lot more difficult now to get puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in Netherlands and the Scandinavian countries, because they've been doing this before we have, and now they're seeing the fallout. They're seeing the lawsuits. They're seeing the fact that this did not take away the problems. In fact, the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom is being shut down this spring because of all of the research that later came out that was being hidden, that these kids would come into the clinic, they would kind of fast track along this path of transitioning, and then years later realize they were not any better off. All the mental health issues, these comorbidities were just there. And these hormones and the pills and all that stuff, it was kind of a wonderful distraction for a time, but it was actually distracting them from what actually needed clinical intervention by putting them on these hormones, saying, oh, this is the issue, you're trans, and we'll affirm you, and then all these problems will go away. They tried it, it didn't work, and now the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom is being shut down and being fractured into smaller regional clinics with a greater emphasis on mental health.
Yeah, and so I'm sure you've met a lot of people who have taken the blockers and they later regret it once they're well into adulthood. So where do you think their regret comes from? Like, what made them feel that regret? Well, I don't know if that's a good question.
Yeah, well, I mean, one, when they actually ask the kids, okay, now, just so you know, if you go straight from, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, you might never be able to have a child. If you have top surgery, you'll never be able to breastfeed. If you do have a baby, telling, a 13 or 15-year-old that, I mean, Abigail Schreier, it's like telling them the sun is going to burn out in 5 billion years. It's like, who cares? It's not even on their radar. They're like, somewhere I think I read like only 2 to 3% of the kids, when you raise these concerns to them, they even cared all about it. It's not till they get to their mid-20s when all their friends are starting to raise families and they realize, oh my goodness, that surgery I had years ago, or these hormones, I'm never going to be able to do that. I mean, some people wake up from these surgeries and literally immediately experience regret. Like, oh my gosh, this was totally the wrong decision. But like, what do you do now? I mean, you can't go back. I mean, if a man has a surgery, one's called an orchiectomy, we're actually removing the testes. If you regret that later on, you now need to be on synthetic testosterone for the rest of your natural life because you've cut off your own body's ability to produce that natural hormone. And so even if you're not wanting to stay on cross-sex hormones to take on the appearance of the opposite sex, you're going to have to get supplements of your own hormones to even function normally as the male that you are. And so big pharma is behind a lot of this. The pharmaceutical companies, the medical institutions are making extraordinary amounts of money medicalizing these kids for life.
Yeah, and so like, have a lot of these people that you met, are they now content with their lives? Do they now realize their own value? Or is it more of a general trend that they're still uncontent with their lives as they were when they were children?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a journey in the sense that it's not like, okay, I acknowledge my biological sex, now we're good. A lot of times there's so many other issues going on. I know an anesthesiologist who said that he's told the doctors at his hospital, don't approach him if you want him to give anesthesia to a kid getting one of these gender surgeries. Because he said, look, I've seen the medical charts. I've seen the comorbidities, the history of trauma, of bereavement, of broken families, of autism, of depression, anxiety, self-harm, so much stuff going on here that really needs treatment. He said, to put these kids on hormones and surgery is contributing with a mental illness instead of actually treating it. He said, that's malpractice. I'll have no part of it. And so just because a kid realized, okay, that wasn't the right decision, they now have to realize, okay, maybe my body is not supposed to be the target of intervention. But it's a lot easier to say, I don't like my body than it is to say, I don't really like myself. It's a lot easier to go after the body as a target because, yeah, you can poke the testosterone into your bloodstream and you can do this and you can do that. You feel like you're kind of making some progress. It's almost like someone who has an eating disorder whose life might be out of control in many respects, but if they can count the calories, the macros, and the number on that scale, it feels like they're getting some sense of control in their life. And so just by desisting from that process of transitioning, it doesn't necessarily mean these other issues are taken care of. In fact, it means now we need to start beginning to address those deeper issues. And that in itself can be a journey. It takes a lot of courage, and therefore they need our support and love.
Mm-hmm. So do you think this is going to get better or it's going to get worse before it gets better?
It'll get worse before it gets better. I don't think there's any question about that. But there will be an actual tsunami of detransitioners that are going to sue the pants off of these clinics, and they're going to win. I mean, entire medical institutions are going to be bankrupted over the scandal of this thing. It's basically, I read one plastic surgeon, he says the equivalent of the 21st century of lobotomy. Was that medical procedure back a century ago where they thought, oh, well, let's, mutilate the brain and then you're going to be better. Like, no, that was creating problems, not solving them. But the only thing that corporate America and these pharmaceutical companies are going to look at is the bottom line. Once the investors of these companies realize, whoa, this is hurting our bottom line, then they're going to back off. I mean, you look at what's happening with Bud Light right now with, the trans advocate that they have on the beer cans. I just saw on the news yesterday that their stock went down by $5 billion since March 31st, since they've started to use this person to kind of promote their stuff. The phrase "go woke, go broke," has some merit to it, because the vast majority of Americans are not on board with this stuff. And so if we're going to change the culture, unfortunately, I think what's going to need to lead the way is, obviously our prayer and our fasting, but financially, that's what they're going to listen to. When no one's buying your beer, going to Disneyland, or doing whatever, going to your movie because it's too woke, well, then they're going to start thinking about what type of content they're putting out in the future. Yeah.
So have you received a lot of hate since writing your most recent book? You said your Facebook page got hacked and deleted.
Yeah, no, it's still hacked. They put it back on. They still have possession of it. We're working with Facebook, but it's unbelievable how slow they are to help you out. So these people are still administrating our Facebook page, putting, for whatever reason, our content on the page. So I don't know what the end game is of it, but yeah, they hacked into it within a few weeks of the gender book coming out. But yeah, I mean, you do get hate mail. You do get hate speech and things like that, but in the end, we can't be cowered into silence, because we have to be motivated by love, for love of these young people who one day will say, what did I do to my body? And then they're going to look up and say, what did you adults let me do to my body? Where was everybody speaking up for me when I thought this was the right path? And everybody was just like, well, you be you, and use you whatever pronouns and hormones you want. You'll be your authentic self. It's like, no, if you have to physically harm your body to be your authentic self, then something is wrong in that treatment pathway. And so we need to speak up, be bold. Some people are going to lose their jobs over this thing. There's going to be a bit of a cultural battle, but these young people wrestling with it, we shouldn't think of them as like these culture warriors. They're kind of casualties of the culture war, if anything. And so what they need is mercy and compassion, not more hate speech.
Yeah, so is that what you would tell like a middle schooler that has classmates that are getting into this stuff, the gender stuff? What would your advice be to just a random middle schooler who wants to talk to these people, who wants to help them?
Yeah, well, befriend these individuals, because, like, let's say there's a girl exploring the idea of becoming a boy or non-binary or whatever. I think guys and girls need to be friends with her and spend time with her. And then maybe she'll meet some other girls like her. And this typically happens. I mean, 80 to 95% of the time, the kids desist from it. They drop it as puberty goes along. I read the story of one girl just yesterday, and she was the total tomboy, and she was playing sports with the boys and this and that. Then puberty hit, and like overnight, all these guys got so much bigger than her, and she even got in a fist fight with one of the guys, and he put her in a headlock and punched her several times. And she said that was the turning point for her, because she was like, if that's what a guy is, I don't even want to be a guy anymore. And she desisted from it. And it obviously a kind of a bizarre way to desist from this gender dysphoria, but she realized, like, I'm not like those guys. As much as I think I have some common interest, I'm not one of them, nor do I even want to be that if that's what a guy is. And so I think they need to spend more social time in person to realize that femininity is a big place to live. You can change the oil in your car, and you can like to be into roughhousing and still be 100% girl. You don't need to wear pink dresses and bows and paint your nails like the other girls and still be a girl. And so sometimes these overly rigid gender stereotypes cause young people to question the concept of gender, to question their own biology. And so by spending more time with real friends in real life, hopefully those individuals can gently help them to let go of these rigid notions of gender, that if I don't fit in this box, then that's not who I am.
Yeah. So getting into Cartesian philosophy, how much of this do you think you could trace back to Descartes, Rene Descartes?
Yeah, I mean, well, his dualist thought, I think, therefore I am, this idea that, and well, apparently he didn't actually say this, but those who were commentators of his work said he thought of us as ghosts trapped in machines. In other words, there's this real identity, but it's trapped in this stuff that we kind of have to get out of. And so that kind of dualist thought has been around for millennia. I mean, the early Christians were dealing with this, and the Manichaeans, and the different forms of dualist thought that kind of the spirit is good, but matter is inferior. And that heresy never seems to go away. And so that is kind of a philosophical underpinning of gender theory, that the body isn't meaningful, the body is meaningless, and your true self is something other than your body. And as opposed to the Catholic anthropology, which is that your body is you, that the body reveals the person. But the challenge is if we untether who you are as a person and your identity from your body, then it has to attach somewhere. But if your identity doesn't attach to your body, it's going to attach to your personality. But the problem is that there are as many personalities as there are persons, and you will end up with an endless spectrum of genders, which to me, the end game of gender theory isn't to have 5 billion genders. It's for gender itself to become meaningless, because then male doesn't really objectively mean anything, nor does man or husband or father or priest. Everything's kind of up for grabs. And if our bodies don't reveal anything, then the spousal meaning of the body, which is what John Paul said was essential to understand what it means to be human, becomes erased. That my body doesn't reveal complementarity. It doesn't reveal that I'm supposed to make a gift of myself and love. The body doesn't mean anything, because what's the natural complement to somebody who's non-binary or gender fluid? There is no complement to that. And all of a sudden, this spousal meaning of the body, and therefore the meaning of life, becomes erased. And so to me, that's the end game of gender theory. It's not something I think they've really thought out, but I think that we need to understand that the ultimate architect of this is not Judith Butler and Simone de Beauvoir and second wave feminists. It goes way back before the dualists, to the Garden of Eden, to the one who's the enemy of human nature itself, which is the evil one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really terrible thing that children growing up during puberty, already a vulnerable time when their bodies are physically changing, they're being confused, confusions being added to their lives. So what would your advice be to a 13-year-old girl who believes that she's not who she truly is, that she's not in her body? What would your first piece of advice be to her?
Yeah, one, it was interesting. I'm reading a book right now about the collapse of the gender clinic in the United Kingdom. And one of the doctors over there took the young people who are experiencing gender dysphoria of their support group with the psychologist and paired them with the support group the psychologist was working with of detransitioners. And said, well, let's just put the support groups together and work with these, young people together. And what they found is once they put the detransitioners with those who wanted to transition, those who wanted to transition, the number of them went down to 2%. 90%, 98% of them desisted of their desire to transition once they actually met detransitioners and realized how much they had in common with them, but then realized, wait a minute, this person is 10 years further down the path that I think that I want to go. And they explored it, and they went through the same struggles that I'm going through, and they sought out the treatment that I want to seek out. And then they realized this didn't solve anything. And so I think it'd be really helpful for them to get online and start learning about detransitioners, learning their stories, listening to their podcasts, reading some of the stuff on their websites, realizing how much you have in common with them. And, the fact is, this just isn't the answer. That's why globally, the places that have been doing this the longest, as I'd mentioned, Scandinavian countries, they're the ones scaling back. Whereas here in America, pedal is to the metal. It's almost like if you had an iPhone and you're, using it to navigate, and it says, a quarter of a mile ahead on the freeway is a 60-car pileup with black ice and, frozen conditions and, casualties, and you're driving 80 miles an hour towards this. Okay, what do you do with that information? Oh, well, let's just keep going and see what happens. It's like, I better hit the brakes now because I know what's about to hit. And so the more they can spend time with people who've been on this path, the better. The more they can connect to their own family, the better. To try to not get isolated, especially on social media, just wasting literally months and months and months of their life plugged into some screen, isolated from reality. That's the path you don't want to go on. So get connected to the people that love you. and give yourself some time. Don't rush through this whole thing, because the changes that these young people are making are irreversible things that they can never get back. And so God made you good. Even if you feel you don't you fit in with the other girls or the other guys, you don't have to fit in, because God made you and he made you good.
Amen. So I think a commonality between a lot of these individuals, these children, is that they have involved parents, but their parents are actually kind of feeding them these bad ideas, especially for those before the teenage years. You see children as young as 5 or 6 getting into some of this stuff. How would you address that? How would you fix that problem? It's a pretty difficult question.
That's a tough one. I mean, it is really tough, because how do you get to these parents? Because these parents have been fed this lie from culture that, well, if your kid is into this stuff at 5 or 6 and doing gender nonconforming behavior, then, I mean, even you got President Biden saying, hey, the best thing that you can do for the well-being of your kid is to support them in their transition. That is the best thing you can do. It's like, are you out of your mind? Have you read a single page of the literature of what ends up happening? That when they go through the transition and they have the surgery, their suicide rate climbs to 19 times higher than the general population. And then when you isolate out the female to male transitioners, the suicide rate's more than 40 times as high as the general population. And so if you know any parents that are exploring this stuff, give them my book, Male, Female, Other. Give them Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. Have them read this stuff and realize, no, this is a trend that is going on, that is going to have a cataclysmic result. And it's already begun. It's already underway. All the lawsuits. I mean, the biggest lawsuit so far in the UK was a girl named Kiara Bell. She took puberty blockers starting at 16, went on testosterone about a year later. By the time she was 20 or so, she had a double mastectomy. And then she, a year or two later, realized, what the heck did I do to my body? And she sued the biggest gender clinic in UK, Tavistock, went up all the way to the High Court in England, which is their Supreme Court. And the judges ruled in her favor. And that a young person cannot even have informed consent to understand that when you're going on puberty blockers, you're starting to tip the first domino of a whole chain. It isn't just some treatment pathway in and of itself, because almost every single kid who goes on puberty blockers goes on to cross-sex hormones. And then you've got the sterilization. You got everything that flows from that. And so these parents, I know that they love their kids, but they're deeply misinformed. And so we have a responsibility to speak up, to help inform them, because a lot of them are scared to death, because they said, well, I heard if you don't let your kid transition, then they'll commit suicide. No, this is a suicide narrative. You look at throughout the history of civilization, you haven't had this massive amount of young people who killed themselves because they didn't get puberty blockers, because they didn't even come out with puberty blockers until recently. It's providing these services that's telling the kids, if you don't have this, you're going to kill yourself. When in reality, when the kids go on the puberty blockers, they become more likely to self-harm. And so I think what's needed here is education and courage to get these parents more checked into reality.
Yeah, and so I'll get your thoughts on one last thing. So I'm not in the news that much, but it was the Nashville school shooting that just happened a few weeks ago. And that shooting was carried out by a trans individual. And there was also a trans day of vengeance happening in Washington, D.C., I think so. But there was a lot of hate against the trans community. So that the hate wouldn't be the correct answer, but what would be the correct answer to that situation, to that community?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have an extremely distressed individual who's engaging in these things. And so I think what that person needs is understanding and compassion, because what's going on here is there's a lot of mental health issues that these young people are wrestling with. It's almost like gender dysphoria isn't just kind of like one spot. It's typically one point in a constellation of other mental health issues, family dynamics going on, and that needs a lot of treatment. That's why, I mean, people say, oh, well, they're committing suicide because of you transphobic bigots. It's because 90% of people who commit suicide have a diagnosable mental health disorder. And so you look at the people doing all these school shootings, I mean, typically they have mental health issues, and giving kids hormones and surgeries does not take away mental health issues. And so that person, obviously, I don't know what their experience was going to that school and how they were brought up, and if they experienced a lot of hatred and bigotry, and this was just an act of vengeance. But hating people who experience gender dysphoria is not the answer to this. It's just going to create more hate crimes because hate just breeds hate. I think what's needed is mercy and love, and to walk with these people, because we're told that, well, you either accept them and you affirm their gender identity, or you are rejecting and abandoning them and you're a transphobic bigot. It's like, no, I reject that narrative. I think there's something called accompaniment, where you can walk with these people in love, but if you love somebody, you can't lie to them. And so it does involve speaking the truth to them in love. And hopefully if enough of us do that, then these tragedies can hopefully be avoided in the future.
All right. I think that's a good place to end. Jason, thank you for coming on. You're welcome back anytime. So I encourage everyone to go buy Jason's book. Watching that Matt Fradd interview, you put a lot of work into it. You said you interviewed like dozens of people, experts from all areas of life.
Yeah. I mean, because no one can be an expert in everything. And so I did the research on my part, reading 20,000 pages of books on endocrinology and pediatric medicine and psychology and philosophy and all that. But I ran the manuscript by people who are experts, particularly in those fields. To have an endocrinologist read the whole thing, a pediatric medicine doctor read the whole thing, people in philosophy, people even in the trans community, I had them read it and give them their 2 cents of how does this kind of land on your heart, experts in public policy and medicine. So I really wanted to have people who excel in those particular fields go through with a red pen and help me to correct it, make nuances and updates. And I think that's what gives it the strength, is the ability to realize I don't know everything, but these people have been in the trenches in all these particular fields, and I can help weave together all of their insights, hopefully to help young people and even older people who be wrestling with this personally, or even if they have family members going through it as well. So yeah, the book's Male, Female, Other, Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. People can find it on our website, chastity.com.
Yep, and the link's in the description as well. Jason, you're doing God's work. Keep on doing what you're doing and keep on helping others.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. God bless.
All right. God bless everyone that's watching. Have a happy Thursday.